Hello and welcome. This is a demonstration on how to use the Shared Preferences feature inside the Android framework to store information between runs of your program. Also, we'll be showing how to put text on the user interface using the TextView widgets. So first, you may have wondered, how do you get text on the screen? So let's whip through that fairly quickly. I've got here a standard Android project that's been created with the UI up, and I'm going to drag and drop elements onto the screen. So put one here, and I'm going to rename it down here in the bottom right. I'm going to call it text, txt, and let's call it current time. We'll use it for the current time that we're running our program. And let's put a small one, why not, down here at the very bottom left as well. And we're going to call this one text last time. What I'm going to do is I'm going to record the time that my application starts, and I'm going to show it on the screen when it runs. Now what we want to do is we want to show when was the last time that the application was run, and that's what we're going to use this widget, this text view down here at the bottom. So let's run it to start with. I've already got my Android emulator open. This will save my changes, and then it's going to pop up in here, and it's simply going to show me the two text views on the UI. Of course, it's not going to put anything there yet. What we're going to have to do is we're going to have to populate the text for each of these, and we're going to want to have the current date and time shown up here on the top, and then down at the bottom we'll load the last date and time that we ran the program. So that's going to take a bit of work to get working. So on the left, I'm going to open up my Java source file, which of course is where I'm going to put the code to actually make this one sing and dance. I don't need the onCreate for the options menu, so I'll get rid of that just to clean up the code a little. So the things I'm going to want to do, I'm going to want to display the current time. I'm going to want to display the last started time, and manage all of that. So let's start off with displaying the current time. So I could write the code right here inside onCreate, but I like to have things on their own functions. So I'm going to create a function called, display current time. Now, Eclipse is quite helpful in the sense that it's telling me it doesn't know what this is, but I can either go Control-1 while I'm clicked on it, and I can select an option here. I want to create it. So it automatically creates the method for me. So now what I want to do is I want to first come up with some text that's going to be displayed. So string, say text, is equal to the current time is. Now I somehow want to put something here. I want to put the current time. The easiest way to do that is use a date object. So I can use a date object built into Java. Let's call it date. Yeah, let's call it current time. Current time is equal to new date. And a feature of the date constructor, if you call it without any arguments, it gives you the date and time right now. So then what I can say here is this is going to be current time, and I could just leave it there, or I could say .toString. So now we're going to use the toString method to get the current date and time, and I've got it in a string. Now, I want to put that on the screen somehow, so I have to use the find view by ID. So I can say find view by ID. It needs to be some resource, so I can use r.id, and under here we're going to see all of the different things. So I want to get the current time resource. That was what I named my text box on my UI. So current time. Now what this does, this is going to give me back a reference to this text view. So I need to store it somewhere. So it's going to be an object. So let's go text view. I'll call it text view with a lowercase t equals. I'm going to say find view by ID. Now the problem here is that text view is returning back a view, whereas text view is a subclass of that. So in order for this to actually work, I need to cast it. Text view. So now I've cast that, and I'm going to have to import the Android text view widget. Okay, so now I've got the text view. I need to do something with it. Text view dot. Well, I want to set the text. So you could look up online how to do that, or you could use Eclipse as autocomplete. Let's just start typing in. I want to set something. It's probably called set text. Oh, and there it is. Set text. We can see there's a few different versions. The first one's simple enough for us. We'll just take it. I need to specify some sort of text to provide. It happens to have already completed my text string variable that I had up above named, well, you guessed it, text. And now it'll call that. So let's run this and prove it works. Save the changes. When I come up here, we're now expecting this top text view to display the date and time of when I run it. We can see that I'm running this on what my Android thinks is February 5th at 1 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. Of course, this isn't the actual date, but my Android's out of date. Well, now I need to set up the text down here at the bottom. Well, that's going to be pretty similar code. Let's say display last start time. Again, I'll put it into a method. Control 1, create the method. Now I like to have things ordered in the way that actually has the order in the code. Oops. And let me move back one more slot there. I want to move this down to be after the display current time because that's how I'm calling it. Now I could retype all the text, the code. I'm going to copy and paste. Generally, anytime you copy and paste, think to yourself there's probably a better way. So if I was spending a bit more time on this, I'd probably refactor it to extract a method. Now we don't want it to say the current time is. We can say the last time you started, or let's call it the last start time equals. Well, I don't want to call the current time. Let's say start time. I'm going to create a variable called last start time here. Don't need the date. So last start time is going to be a string. And I'm going to make it, well, where can I get this from? Let's just make it an empty string for the moment. And I'll figure that out in just a minute as to where I can get that from. Now let's complete this particular method I'm working on. I want a text view. I want to set the text to be whatever text I'm creating up here, but I don't want to use the current time. So I'll delete that. I'll go Control Space, and it'll bring up the autocomplete. I want to bring up the last time. So I'm going to grab a reference to the last time widget on my UI, and now I can change that. So let me run this. Oops. Control F11. When this comes up, we're going to see at the very bottom, this instead of saying small text, it's going to say when the little message we're creating at the moment. Of course, we don't yet have the actual time there. Now we've got to figure out where that comes from. Well, now we come to the issue of we have to store a value. We've got to store a value from when we run the application once until we run it the next time. There's a number of ways we can do this on the Android. We can write a file to the SD card, we can access a database, or what we're going to use here is a fairly simple way called the shared preferences. Now, shared preferences allow me to associate any value I like with a certain text string. It works very similar to the way the registry works on Windows. We're associating a value with a string. And that's going to be a string just for my application when I work with it here. Now, how am I going to do that? Well, I said here I wanted to make this last start time. That's now going to have to be pulled from the shared preferences. So what I think I'll do is I'll create a function. I like functions. So let's say get last start time. Doesn't exist, this function, but I can Control 1, I can create it. So I'm going to get the last start time here. Now I might want to say, for example, get last start time from shared preferences, so I can go Alt-Shift-R from shared preferences. And maybe this is a little long. I'll leave it for the moment because it really describes what's happening. In your real code, you probably want to make it quite a bit shorter. So I'm going to do something here to give me a string back. And to kind of complete the thing, I need to have a way of actually storing the shared preference value. So I'm going to create a new function, private, and it's going to be a void. And we're going to say it's going to be store start time to shared preferences. So I'll create a new function here that's going to write the value into shared preferences. So I got to put it in and I got to read it out. Now I got to figure out where I'm going to call this. I want to call it every time I start my application. I don't want to call it before I write stuff to the UI, otherwise I overwrite a value. So I'm going to call it right here at the end of my onCreate method. So I go onCreate, I'm going to update my UI. It's going to show the current time. It's going to show the last time I started the application. And then we're going to store whatever time it currently is into the shared preferences. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave this for the moment. Let's go back and let's write the get the start time. I'm going to add a little bit of space here just to scroll the screen up. So what do I want to do? Well, I have to get a reference to the shared preferences object. So that's shared preferences is the object type. Now let's call it prefs. Now I've got to get it from somewhere. It just so happens that I've derived my activity from the activity class, as I have to. It has a method called getSharedPreferences. So I can say get shared pref, and I'll get this far. I don't want to type the whole thing in, so I hit Control Space. It auto-completes for me. Now I've got to provide two things here. One is the name. I can have a number of different sets of preferences. I might have like a volume control preferences, and I might have a application display preferences, and maybe a user settings preferences. All of these are things I come up with. So I'm going to come up with here, let's just give it a funny name to differentiate it. So app times. Maybe I want to store the start and shut down app times or something like that. You'll name this something more meaningful for whatever your application is. Now for the mode, the general mode I'm going to use is mode private. Autocomplete on that. This is going to say that only my application can access it. If you want any more information on this, you can mouse over it, and it brings up the information here. I'm going to click in. I can scroll down to see. It says here for the mode, use 0, which is the constant mode private, as the default operations, and so forth. You can switch that as needed. Now, I need to import here. I guess I probably typed that wrong. So rather than me trying to figure out my typo, I'm just going to try again. Shared, Control Space, Shared Preferences. Fantastic. Now I've got to use it somehow. So what I want to do is I want to get from it the value. Well, what's the value going to be? It's going to be a string. So string, and let's call it extracted value, extracted text. So I can go from prefs dot. Now I want to get some text. So I'm going to say get. We see here there's a method called getString. You'll note that there's a bunch of other methods for all the different basic data types or primitive data types. So if you did want to store a float, you'd use getFloat. If you're trying to read out a long, use getLong. I just want to work with a string, so I'm going to stick with a string. I've got to specify two things here. One is the key. The key is basically how does it know what value to get. You can imagine I'm storing 7 different times in this shared preference. Which one of them am I wanting to deal with now? So I just come up with a name. Any name I like. Let's call it start time. Now the default value is the value it's going to give me if the thing named start time doesn't exist. Because, for example, the first time I run the program, it's not going to have a start time recorded. So it's going to hand me back something. What is it going to give me? Well, I can put anything I like in here. It's a string, so it's got to be a string. And let's say no time recorded. That's good enough for us. And then what I want to do is I want to return it. So extracted, I'll autocomplete that. So now what have we got? We have a function called displayCurrentTime. Displays the current time of our application loading. I've got a displayLastStartTime function, which is also being called. And it's going to call in here a getLastStartTime from SharedPreferences. This is going to consult a SharedPreferences object named prefs based on this being the SharedPreferences set and this being the specific SharedPreferences item. I give it a default value that I'm going to get until I store a value in SharedPreferences, which of course will come down here. But that's the next thing we'll do. Let's run it. So Control F11 to see what's going on here. It's currently reloading the application. And so at the bottom, we're now expecting to see no value. The text for no time recorded. Okay, so that was a long way of going about getting this text up. Let's see when it actually starts to pay off. We're not yet storing this time into any point. So if I run the program again, it's going to be the identical thing. Well, new time up here, but nothing yet stored down here. So let's actually save a value. So to save a value, it's a bit more complicated. I need to create an editor and then commit the edit. This is designed to support multi-threading or these sort of transaction-based approaches. So I'm going to start by copying and pasting this. Again, copying and pasting isn't necessarily your friend, but it'll allow me to get off the ground quick. So this gives me a preferences object that I can work with. Again, the same set of preferences as before. What I want to do is I want to come up with an editor. So I need to get a shared preferences editor. This happens to be a subclass of shared preferences. So I can say shared And oh, we got a typo there, shared preferences. If I say put a dot here, I want the editor. This is a subclass of shared preferences, and let's call it editor. Now I can get this off the prefs object, so prefs dot, and here we have an edit function that actually returns. So let me go back here just to show you what's going on. This is the edit function, which is going to return a shared preferences editor. So now I need to use the editor. So I can say here, let's say editor dot, and we can see a lot of things. Now what I want to do is we're using get before. I now want to use put. So I can say put, and we can see there's a put again for every one of the primitive data types. I want to use a string, so put string. I need to give it a key. I can give it any key I like, but it's going to create an item by that name. So I'm going to create a start time. This matches my start time up here, which is exactly what I need. And then the value is whatever string I want to put there. We haven't created that yet, so let's go up here and create that. String text equals, I can say new date dot to string. Here I'm creating an anonymous object, anonymous date object, and I'm calling toString on it. I could have split it up, much as I had done up here, where I create a date object and then call toString on it. Yeah, it's just a different way of reducing the number of lines of code. So now that I've got my string, I can put it into here. Now it's a void function, I don't need to return anything, but there is one thing that still has to happen. And in fact, with any luck, Eclipse is going to warn me about it. So here we have a warning. We have a shared preferences edit without a corresponding commit or apply call. So that's very handy. We need to actually commit this before any change will have occurred. So I can say editor dot commit. I can queue up a bunch of these changes here. You can imagine I might have 5 things I want to switch at once. I could do all those changes to the same editor. They're not going to take effect until I call the commit function on it. So now what's going to happen is I've got this store start time to shared preferences, and I'm calling it at the end of my onCreate method. So at the end of the onCreate method, it saves the value into this data storage place, and then anytime I want it, I can call this get, and I can read it from using the shared preferences editor, or pardon me, shared preferences object, and I'm going to call getString. So with any luck, this is now going to do what we want. I'm going to run the program. We'll see it reload here. And now we've got all the code in place to give us a value at the bottom. But nothing came up. Why is that? Well, because we're saving a value after we've executed onCreate. That value is read in the middle of onCreate. So we have not yet saved a value. But now that we've actually displayed the screen, the value has been saved, and so the next time we run our program, which I'll demonstrate here, it'll be able to read the value out of the shared preferences. So down here we have the last time we ran it, which you'll note is just slightly different than the current time it's showing. So this is a fantastic way to maybe say save a user's name. If you're asking the user for a name and you don't want them to enter it at every time, you say, I'm going to save it in a shared preferences. Now remember that the first time you run it, it's not going to have a value there for you. So you have to use this default value here. Now the last thing I want to demonstrate is how we can clean this up just a little. This string is a magic string. Where did it come from? It's just something I made up. So I'm going to actually right-click on it. I'm going to select here the refactor. I'll do an Alt-Shift-T just to get it on screen. So Alt-Shift-T. And I'm going to say I want to extract a constant. And we've got to give it a name, so let's give it a meaningful name. So this is going to be shared pref, and let's call this the set. It's a set of shared preferences. And we can see here it changed it in all places, which is good. Now, if I needed to change it, maybe the application changed, I want to change it to a new name, I can update it in just one place. And likewise with this, this needs to be used in a couple different places. Rather than me having to type it in exactly every time and hoping to get it right, I'm going to go Alt-Shift-T, and then extract a constant. And let's give it a name called SharedPref item, and it's called start time. So it's a shared preference item, and it is for the start time. I want to give it a reasonably descriptive name so that I know when I'm using it later in my program I can just access it. So again, a minor refactor there. I'll rerun my program. Nothing should have changed. We're expecting the new time to be 13:38 for the last time it ran. So down here at the bottom we see, yep, 13:38. We got the new time at the top. Okay, so what have we seen? We've seen how to structure the program using some methods. We've seen how to access and populate some text on the screen. We saw briefly how to use the date object. And then we saw how to use the shared preferences. So we saw how to extract a value from shared preferences, just using the preferences object, and then calling the getString, or get whatever data type you like. And then down here we saw that we can save a value into the preferences. You always want to make sure that you think about when do I want to save the value, and when do I need to read the value. Alright, that concludes this demonstration. Thank you very much for watching.